So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the BYU Cyber Defense team. Some of the things that we've been doing over the past few years, some of the strategies that we've used, how they kind of relate to everyday work, whether you're in college, whether you're professionally working, whether you're sysadmin, security analyst. A lot of this stuff will apply, I think. It's definitely stuff that's been useful to me in my professional career outside of teaching. I want you to think for a second. Think back to when the last time that it really hit the fan. It might have been a breach, it might have been a systems failure, but something really went really wrong and something you were responsible for. You got called in at the last minute to come and try and address or fix or remediate or investigate. And try and think about kind of the pressures you had there. Was your job perhaps on the line? Was someone else's, perhaps a colleague? Was there anything there that could have been long-term serious for you or the organization, and how did that feel at the time? And really that's what a cyber defense team goes through. They consolidate all of this down, perhaps a year's worth or 2 years worth of events that you would typically see, and they pack it into 2 days, and they put these students in there who are, some of them barely started college in the case of our team, and see how they perform. So I'll talk to you a bit about how the team started, what kind of got us involved in this, some of the things they've learned in their work, how playing is kind of really useful in this, and how they kind of overcame some of the stress difficulties. And we've seen some really interesting stuff from some of the other teams at these events and how they perform. And then a little bit about some of the differences on our team, some of the things that made the team really unique compared to the other competitors, and really made them kind of stand out to the sponsors that were there. First of all, when we complete that, a little bit of my background. I spent most of my career between 2002, 2003, up to 2010, working in the secure satellite communications sector. I was designing kind of ground control systems, authentication systems for flying satellites, military communication satellites. And about 2009, I got a nice email from the college, University of Kent in England, that said, basically, we're going to get rid of you as a PhD student because you haven't done anything for a while. And I kind of had this crisis moment where I said, okay, I should probably go back and finish off my dissertation and submit it. Did that and came out in 2010 to start at Brigham Young University as an assistant professor. My focus area is cybersecurity and systems administration. Often when you hear people talk about cybersecurity, they've got a niche, a field that they're in. I really just love it all. I'm really something that I enjoy doing, I enjoy sharing, and I enjoy getting involved with. All the faculty at BYU get an office, right? It's this little space where students come to meet you in office hours, and mine has dust on the keyboard and everything else in that room probably for about a year. I have a research lab down in the basement with about 10 to 12 students, and I live down there. I spend my time down there with them because I think it's important to kind of keep my hands dirty and also to be able to show them and kind of learn from them what they're doing and what they're getting out of this. We'll talk about penetration testing and how that kind of pertains to all this in just a minute. The main classes I teach are malware analysis, incident response, forensics, penetration testing. So anything to do with security, it's kind of my passion and my area of enjoyment. About the program, the information technology program, we often get confused, so I kind of always take this point to kind of get a little bit of a plug for the program. It really is unique. If I could have studied something like this as an undergrad, it would have probably got me a real good kickstart. We have about 250 students, 7 faculty members. We've got a bachelor's and a master's program. It really is a professional program. It's not so much an academic kind of researcher program, although we do have some research stuff going on. Most of it is preparing students for the professional track. If you've kept up to date with the media, you'll have known a few years ago that BYU was designated an academic center of excellence by the NSA and DHS, and that was the IT program that actually got that award. We have a student club that does all kinds of cybersecurity stuff, so if any of you are interested in kind of getting involved, that's probably one of the best ways to come and get involved with us. I'll have contact information up at the end for that. And a cybersecurity research lab. Now, one of the things that's really unique about this program compared to almost any other program I've seen, bar maybe 2 or 3 in the US since I've been here, is it has security throughout the curriculum. And by that we mean that when students are in IT 101 and they're learning how to code basic HTML, we're there at the same time talking to them about file security and policies of information assurance and firewalls. And as they go through networking, they're learning about ARP spoofing and DNS attacks. And as they go through databases, they're learning about injection and database permissions and security. So it really is kind of woven throughout, and they come out of this with a lot of potential. Despite that, research shows that it takes the average student about 5 years, 3 to 5 years, to become independently useful in the field of cybersecurity. That means that when they come and work for perhaps one of your companies, they're going to get out there and you're going to have someone mentoring them or sitting alongside them and watching what they're doing and making sure they don't screw things up for at least 3 years. And this was a number that I saw in a few publications back in 2010, and it really became a thing for me, a personal goal to say, okay, well, what can we do to get this down? How do we get this 3 to 5 years down to 1 to 2 to 3 years? What can we do to shrink that? Because if we need to fill, what is the latest? I think 20 million cybersecurity positions by 2020. We can't wait 5 years. I mean, it's already 2016. And so CCDC is one of these ways, and it's one of many ways that students can get an opportunity to really get some real-world experience. Despite the fact that this specific competition is simulated, it gives them some real-world hands-on experience that they won't get anywhere else. In fact, a lot of employers comment that they can't even create this type of experience for their own employees in trainings. So it really is a unique opportunity to be able to go and do something different. So what is it? CCDC was started in 2004 at the University of Texas, San Antonio. It involves 10 regions now. About 10 teams per region will enter the regionals. In fact, in some regions, it's so contested that you have to qualify to make regionals. So although I said 100 teams here competing, it often can start off with about 150 to 200 teams going through the qualifying rounds. You make it to regionals, you compete against 8 to 12 other teams, depending on the region. And if you're successful there, you get onto nationals. Only one winner per region goes to nationals, and that gives 10 teams competing at nationals around April time each year. In fact, this last year, it coincided with BYU's convocation and graduation date. So everyone who came to every one of our seniors who came to that competition missed their graduation to be able to attend. The whole goal of this is to give a realistic experience to students. So the model that they use is they give them a network. Okay, the students get this network that represents some kind of business model. And we've seen things like 2 healthcare companies merging with a takeover. And so their IT systems are merging together, 2 different domains, 2 different infrastructures. And the students have to merge these in the 2-day period. We've seen the CDC with a zombie virus outbreak, where this blue team of students were stuck in this kind of basement infrastructure room and had to keep all the CDC's critical services up while the zombie outbreak was going. And the end result was, as the competition ended, they kind of sounded across the intercom, get out now, this is it, you're the last people, run for your lives. Some of them are kind of said healthcare practices, educational establishments, government departments, state departments they've had before. Anything you can imagine, but it's based on a real scenario and often things that the sponsors of the competition have experienced themselves. So then they have a series of injects. These injects are business cases. There'll be things like do an audit of your password policy or gather all system logs relevant to this and report on our risk. The students have to write these reports and respond to these injects in professionalese, not technicalese most of the time. So they're going out and they're trying to change things like, the server's down and it's going to be 2 hours before it gets back up to a business impact. What effect is that going to have on the business? Are they still going to be able to make sales, make quotas, et cetera? And if not, what systems can they provide in order to kind of keep things running in the meantime? And if that's not enough, there's then a red team of DoD and professional penetration testing company organizations that are constantly going after these student systems. And they go after them like nothing else. I haven't seen a single competition. Actually, I've seen one competition. But every other competition I've seen, apart from that one, the red team got into every single team system. 2 years ago, we went to a local competition up at Idaho State with about 8 other universities. That was the only time I've seen that one team system didn't get breached. And that was the training team from BYU that went on to regionals this year. They didn't quite achieve that in regionals, but another story. and they're blindfolded. And I'll come back to that blindfold and why that's important in just a minute as well. So the reality is we take this kind of training furnace, we put it the whole thing, we put all the students in a pressure cooker, we drop them in this furnace, and they come out, and I had to edit this meme because it, SAINTCON, not DEFCON, and BYU wouldn't be happy with me if I said something else. So I'm this close to losing my mind, and this is really what they kind of come out feeling like. And we've had teams almost quit, even our own teams in the past. In fact, teams crack quite often. Every year, at least 1 to 2 teams will give up. Now, occasionally, this is a positive experience because they'll work and they'll kind of keep their cool and they'll go in and say, okay, look, can we just drop out the competition and just practice and learn and kind of tell us what to do? And a few of the faculty coaches from other universities will go in and join their own team coach, and we'll just kind of help coach them and give them some tips so that next year they can do better. But unfortunately, we've also seen teams completely rage quit. Team communications fall down, and they get an early flight, or they just leave the campus and they'll head off early and they're done. This is not something that's kind of, oh yeah, it's a bit of pressure. This is stuff that really will, if teams are not ready for it, can cause some serious incidents. Common reasons for that, they're either not prepared, the team communication just breaks down and falls apart, ego warfare. These teams are between, for the regionals and nationals, they're 8 students. And we have leads. We have a Windows lead, a Linux lead, a networking lead, a firewalls lead. So each of these leads, you've got a team with 1 team captain and 7 leads. Okay? Now you can imagine what's going to happen when you put 7 leads on a common business objective or a common task. They're all going to start fighting. They're all going to think their way's the best. The red team's coming in and attacking the system, or the network guy wants to drop the packets from the red team. The firewalls guys wants to create new rules to block the service off. The Windows or Linux guy or web app guy, he wants to go and lock down the service better and kind of kick them off the service. And all 3 of these are trying to happen at the same time. So the firewall guy does his thing, and suddenly everyone loses internet access and network access. And so I call this kind of ego warfare. The kind of individual egos for each specialist have to know how to work together to solve the problems, much like in a real world environment. What really happens, the team enters the room, they're not allowed anything digital. They're not allowed a thumb drive, they're not allowed their phones, they're not allowed their laptops, tablets. Anything that has digital information or digital connectivity is not allowed in that room. They're allowed to take printed paper, and most of them will go in with kind of team strategies and password lists that they can change their passwords to. Everything in that room that's provided for them is configured with no patches, default credentials, and often there's Active Directory domains or LDAP domains with upwards of 200 user accounts, which all have the password. And they don't know the topology, they don't know the infrastructure, and they can't take digital information or use online repositories because every website they have to access is whitelisted. So they can't go out and go Google and go to GitHub and find a script to change all the Active Directory passwords. They either have to know it, have it written down and type it in, or get the site whitelisted, which is often a 1-hour to 2-hour approval process, which would be whitelisted. And by the way, we've been told that's to prevent cheating. I think it does. It does stop kind of pre-staging of materials, but it puts an interesting challenge for them as well. The red teams start at the same time. So when they get into the room, in fact, when they're in the conference room getting the briefing about what the scenario is with all the teams at the start, and they'll say, okay, the competition starts now, go to your rooms and start. That's when the red team get to go as well. And the red team are already at their desks. So by the time the students get to the rooms, often their systems have already been compromised and backdoors have started. The blue team also has a very kind of strict set of rules and regulations, and I'll talk about a few of those, and a very kind of primitive, incomplete network schematic that says, this is the network as we last saw it. And, just for fun, the organizers will put something like, copyright 2007, showing that it's, 8, 9 years out of date. So half the devices on there are no longer accurate. So gets more interesting because 12 to 20 servers, every one you can guarantee is going to be a different platform. So there might be a database server on Debian and a web server on CentOS and a proxy running on IIS. It's going to vary, and they'll make it as interesting and, for want of a better word, perverse as possible in a technology context. There's deadlines. Every single inject has a deadline from 15, 20 minutes up to a few hours. So they're constantly having to respond to these. Business communications I already mentioned. And on top of all this, the sponsors have paid money to help set up this event for the regions and for the national competitions. So it's a career fair, because the sponsors aren't really there to see, what team wins. I mean, they are. That's part of what they want to see, and kind of do some promotion of that. They're really there because they're looking for talent. And so as the students are going out to the restrooms or going out to get their lunch boxes and bring them back into the room, they're kind of getting stopped and kind of just said hello to and greeted by career fairs. And you can imagine the kind of pressure they're under in that competition, with it being a career fair as well. Types of variety, they will be responsible for some hardware, typically laptops and a few rack-mounted servers, normally a switch or a router or a firewall device, and then the rest of it is outside the room and remote access. And often they'll have a second subnet with a virtual kind of cloud presence they have to manage and keep maintaining as well. Typically, we're going to see at least 3 to 4 subnets for each team to manage and look after. And if they don't do discovery, if they just trust the network diagrams, they've already lost, because there's going to be devices in there with big problems that the red team will find within minutes and start turning against them if they don't go and scan. So they have to know how to discover their own networks, how to verify what's there, how to make sure for each of these types of platforms, how to harden it, lock it down, and get the red team out as fast as possible. It is by no means a level playing field. There's some very strict rules. Typically, they're not allowed to migrate anything on day one. And so most of the teams will go in and say, okay, they're allowed to create 1, maybe 2 VM snapshots for each of their machines. So if they go in right at the start and they take their snapshot, well, everything's vulnerable and exposed, and the red team might already be in. But if they then go and harden it and take their snapshot, well, they have to be absolutely certain the red team's not in. Because one of the red team's goals on day 2 is to make them roll back their snapshots. That's on the next slide. They're not allowed to upgrade the operating system on day 1. So if they go in with a Windows XP box and no fix for a vulnerability, they have to live with that for the whole day and until day 2. I mentioned nothing is patched, everything is default, internet access is frequently sporadic, and all sites must be whitelisted. The red team strategy, a little bit different. Day 1, they want to go in, take hold of as many systems as they possibly can, pivot out laterally in the networks, get backdoors, reverse shells, everything they can possibly imagine to attack and put a foothold in, they get into. But their goal is to stay quiet. Okay. Now, a lot of these guys that are doing this are the people who are presenting at DerbyCon and perhaps SAINTCON today and DEF CON and Black Hat. They're not amateurs, they're not script kiddies, they're people who know their stuff. They're the people who write the scripts for Metasploit. They're the people who go up on ExploitDB and write the new exploits for the O-days that are found. And so while they may not, they say they try generally to avoid using O-days, they will use exploits for newly discovered unreleased exploits. And they will use unreleased scripts, and they will use unreleased reverse shell sessions that are not detected by any antivirus vendor or security vendor or even firewall vendor, IDS vendor that we're using. So they'll get in day 1, they'll stealth, they'll get as much presence as they can, and on day 2, because at the end of day 1, all the teams say, okay, we think we've hardened everything, let's take our snapshots now. Day 2, they go in and they start doing things to the teams. And this might be dropping a database, actually getting rid of the data. So they have to go and find a backup and restore from that. It might be exposing their data. And for everything the red team does, the blue team, the student team, loses points. And so we'll see websites defaced. We'll see one of their favorite tactics actually is turning on the VoIP phones and putting them into a monitoring mode so they can listen to everything going in the room. So when the team says, hey, what's the password for this system? And someone calls across the room from their password list, oh, it's this. Then the red team's just heard the new passwords. And so strategies for that include the team having password lists. And this year we numbered our password lists. So each password had an individual number by it. And so when someone would call across the room and say, hey, what's the password for this system? They'd say sheet 3, password 14. And they could look down their list and say it without actually revealing what the password was, just in case the room was bugged or any systems were listening to them. Printers. We've seen full busy box shells and kernels installed onto HP and Lexmark printers. vCenter takeover. They'll get into their vCenter instances and just sit there with backdoored accounts. This last year at Nationals, they had an unpatched version of ESX, and the API was runnable, and the red team was just getting in without even authenticating. And as soon as they changed anything, the red team were seeing it through key logs and everything else going on. They'll black hole networks. One of their favorite tactics is if they see a good firewall, then they'll go and set the default gateways MAC address to match the firewall and just black hole the network until the students roll back the firewall to something that's not properly configured or defending. Route poisoning, etc. Blue team strategies, we have a team lead, team organization. One of the things we really focus on the training is not just how to do things, but why. I mentioned before we have a student red team in the lab. This is something that's really, really useful because they have a lot of understanding about how a red team operates, how a pen tester works, and what kind of tool they might use. So we really want to stop them saying, okay, you know, someone's in our system or dropped this database off the system, so roll it back, because they get in this rollback fight where it's kind of the red team attack, they roll back, the red team attack, they roll back. And we have had teams, and in fact, even this last year, where one or two guys literally spent almost all their time just rolling back a machine because the red team were in so deep and so far that to get them out would have taken more time than just rolling it back. And so someone had to sit there rolling it back every few minutes, just taking it back. Role changes. We'll come back to role changes. It's expanded a little bit later, and thriving under pressure. So this is the scoreboard, and the way CCDC is scored is there is a live score for services and service level agreements, and basically all of the services they're required to keep up will be polled every 4 to 6 minutes, and if it has 3 consecutive fails on the poll response, then it will just drop off it'll drop off and give them a point penalty, and it'll come up as a red service for them. And so what you're seeing here is just the service availability. The first place team right here is BYU. This was about 20 minutes before the competition ended on day 2. But the other things that are scored are the injects and the red team. And so while they did extremely well on the services, they just lost a margin, and it literally was a few 100-point margin out of a 14,000-point score. They lost first place to third-time winners UCF. So we're hopeful next year to displace them, but we'll see how it pans out. So our strategy for this started with the creation of a research lab. And I mentioned at the start, this is kind of my playpen as well. But this lab is unique for a few reasons. We obviously encourage the students to work, but it's also made very clear as new students start there that they can use this for doing any homework. If they want to come down and do their homework there, then we have a lot of upperclassmen mentoring lowerclassmen and kind of help them teach them. And we don't need to police it too much because the students have a pretty good ethical sense of conduct, but we do tell them, don't give solutions, teach the solutions. And so the students down in the lab are constantly kind of teaching each other, and we even have freshmen, once they've done a lab, who'll go and share something with an upperclassman who's forgotten it from a few years ago. So work, study, and play. And this is something that is, I'm a long-time PC gamer, not so much on consoles, but I have wasted many years of my past life on PCs, staring at a screen. And so we encourage and allow, in moderation, an element of gaming to the lab. So, every lunchtime or kind of in the afternoon when things just wind down a bit, people play League of Legends or another game, and they'll just sit there and do team groups together. And we didn't think anything of this in terms of a research or a productivity context until it really came to the competition. And we saw some things this last year that were very, very impressive. And that's going to be in a couple of slides. These students publish papers nationally and internationally. They travel around publishing their research papers, and it's a constant battle to get funds to do that, but it's something that I believe is very worthwhile when they can go and actually present their research and gain some confidence and do this kind of thing that I'm doing right now. In fact, one of our alumni who's working for Adobe, I think in the audience, went to DEF CON a few years ago and actually presented a paper on a wireless quadcopter that he'd designed for his thesis. And that was a really unique opportunity, but it's something that he's remembered and has kind of given him a lot of skills and talents and note for the future. I mentioned the red and blue teams. These are professional level teams. In fact, we started this off just as a project to see if it would work, and we've now gone to the point where it is a student team at BYU that will do the PCI compliance test or do a HIPAA test for the health center. They are trained and proficient to that level. And we've actually had, I won't name any companies, but we've actually had companies come in and do a pen test at BYU for a department, and then we sent this red team out afterwards, and they found more than the original team did without looking at the report. They start off with a full scope, proposal, rules of engagement, contract. They'll submit it to the department, get it signed by the head of the department, and then they'll go, and sometimes this is just a network test. Sometimes it's a full-on source code review. Sometimes it's a physical pen test and social engineering. It's always different, and it's a lot of fun and a great experience for them. And since 2014, the majority of researchers in the lab are actually women. And if I'm looking around the room now, in fact, if I discount the women from the team that are in the room right now, and I'll introduce you to in just a minute, it's a mostly male environment, and that's generally how IT and cybersecurity is. The college has a great scheme where they will actually go and pay for women to do research for a faculty member. So every year, the IT program receives probably 2 to 3 scholarships for women to go and fund a woman to do, a female student to do research for a faculty mentor. And the cybersecurity research lab was a little bit quiet on this for the first year or two. And then we got a couple of women who were really interested in kind of working with their classmates, and they did a huge recruitment job. And we're now at a point where I think we have 8 or 9 women in the lab and about 3 or 4 men, which is completely flipped on its head from how most of your workplaces probably are. But it's led to some very interesting discoveries. In fact, if we went back and we plotted and published last year our research productivity in terms of publications against the gender divide, and as we hit 50%, we peaked. And you'll see that in just a minute on the team. So a few keys to success, and I think these are the parts now that are generic to any cybersecurity team, whether you're an incident response team, a pen testing team, an audit team. There's some keys here that I think are really, really useful. We start off with the technical skills. You have to have these. You can't do without the technical skills. And for CCDC, these are quite diverse and quite broad. And so we end up with enough roles to actually fill the team. So everyone is a lead or the team captain. The team's captain's job is to make sure that everyone is doing what they should be and coping well while they're doing it. And this is something that we've done new for the last couple of years, this kind of coping part, because we started to see some of the teams collapsing under stress and started to think, okay, what can we do to make our team different? So second off, and if at first you don't succeed, hack it. Now this is a really interesting story. This was a couple of years ago. The team were in a situation where they could not figure out how to configure their router and firewall to let the VoIP phone behind it work. Now the VoIP phone is used, they'll receive calls every 15, 20 minutes or so at the team from an actor purporting to be one of the organization's customers or the business's employees. And they will phone up with some kind of problem. The website's down, or how do I change my password for this? Just routine kind of help desk style calls. And so the team are scored on answering this phone system throughout the whole competition. So if their phone goes down, they're not just losing the phone's service scoring points, they're losing every single call they should be getting and responding to. So this is really a priority for it. I imagine quite a few of you have these phones. If I was to ask for a show of hands, how many of you have these in your workplace? I imagine most of the hands in the room are going to go up. If you look at the back of them, they have 2 Ethernet jacks. They have an in and an out. And so what the team ended up doing for this was they actually put their entire network through the phone. That is to say, the cable came into the room from the organizers, from the black team, came into the blue team room. The students took the end of the cable, put it into the phone, and then they took their firewall and their router, and they plugged those into the other port of the phone and ran their whole network behind the phone. So their phone was now in front of it. And if you think about any kind of real-world business scenario, you would never, ever do that for 1,000 reasons, bandwidth just being one of them. But it worked for them, and they were able to survive the second day for the entire day without losing any points for their phone or responding to phone calls. Team unity. I'm going to let the videos tell the story on this, because this is a little bit different. This is just a random moment during the competition when things were going on. Hopefully it'll start. Is that playing? I can't see the screen right there. Am I on it? Yeah, this is the glitch it had. All right, let me get the offline video. Sorry. I came prepared. Okay, that kind of thing was happening throughout the competition. In fact, at one point, I'm not allowed in the room apart from to take photographs with a very strict escort for about 5 minutes. So the only time I saw the team outside during the competition hours was in that room, was for that 5-minute period. But at one point, I was sitting outside the room with the assistant coach who couldn't make it today, Trevor O'Donnell, and we suddenly saw a bunch of white team judges rush into the room. And we kind of looked at each other and said, what's going on? Because our first thought was that either their network's gone down, or with that many judges, someone thinks they're cheating, and they're doing an investigation to see whether they should be disqualified, which does on occasion happen. And so we were really panicking, and then one of the judges came out about 5 minutes later and said, you guys have got to see what's going on in there. And we kind of said, well, you know, what's going on? They were just laughing, singing, dancing. This was the point when the red team were in their systems. They had one guy rolling things back all the time, trying to get the system back up online. All heck was breaking loose, and they were in there singing and dancing and doing stuff like this. Second question is going to be why, right? Goes without saying that they need to communicate, and one of the things that is important to this is a respect of each other's capabilities and talents. The team really has to know each other, know what they can do, and know to respect what they're able to achieve in that room, and work together and collaborate to solve the problems. There's two leaders for the team. There's basically the coach, me, who tries to prepare them for the competition, and then the captain. Now, this is an interesting dynamic here because the captain is actually the one who's in the room with them at the time. And so it was interesting for me a couple of times when we were doing the trainings, the captain say, no, I don't think we should do it that way. We should do it this way. Now, I've been coaching teams for these competitions for about 5 years and know the system pretty well. But it was an interesting scenario to have to kind of sit there and listen to a very, very different idea, and one I thought that was sure to fail, and try and convince the team and the student that that was not the approach to take. Because I'm not in the room. They can go into the room and they can do whatever they like. If they don't want to listen, they don't have to. So I found myself not just having to teach the how to do things, but the why. The why it was important to do things a certain way. And on several occasions, I was wrong. Despite me having some professional experience and doing this, you know, in the aerospace industry and all that other stuff, there were times when I sat down and that we went through things and I was like, nope, you're right. That is the way to do it, and that is a much better approach than the one I was teaching you. And so on both sides, it takes a lot of cooperation for leadership to be effective. This badge that Laura Wilkinson, she couldn't be with us today. She's up in Seattle getting ready to work on a red team for Microsoft. This coin that she has, if any of you have a military background, you'll recognize this is a chief's coin. There was a US Navy SEAL present, one of the judges, and he said every year at the competition he looks for outstanding leadership, something that goes above and beyond just telling people what to do. And he awarded that to Laura. And so the story goes that if you're ever in a bar getting drinks with the military, the chief's coin pretty much trumps everything. So Laura can go in and get free drinks from the military now. Not very useful, but extremely noteworthy, and she was very, very touched and proud to receive that. This video is again not going to work, is it?
And saw your
That's very loud.
team. I saw a team having the most fun I've ever seen in a competition room. You were dancing, you wanted to sing. Did that keep you loose? Did that help you enjoy the competition and do as well as you did?
It's a stress management technique. If we all become really uptight because we're rabbit holing into a thing, getting up and shaking around gives you a little new perspective. Running in place clears the mind, things like that. So, and then the fun stuff just makes it so that morale stays up.
You were the captain of the team?
So again, what I was mentioning before with morale, and this is the part that really kind of stood out to the coaches the whole way through. In fact, I don't know, we are going to be recorded and broadcast, but I guess they won't mind me saying we were actually a favorite. Several of the sponsors came up and said, we're rooting for you guys. Like, we want this team to win. I'm trying to close that window and it's threatening to shut down. There we go. Technical struggle is real here. I'm just going to clone my screen. Just bear with me just a second. It'll be a lot easier if I can see what you see. Morale. This screenshot was, this was his fault. I mean, the photo looks like it. I don't think that's actually what happened, but it was a good way to kind of show what's going on. The single biggest difference between our team and everyone else's was this. The red team, even with the judges, red team were kind of sneaking into the room a couple of times. They weren't allowed to do anything or look at any kind of whiteboards and had to, be closely escorted. But they went in because they wanted to see how this team were like. They were hearing the judges coming out and saying, this team is still laughing, and you're not doing a good enough job, red team, because they're still having a good time. The team spirit there was completely unquenchable. There was nothing that could happen to this team that would get them fighting or shouting at each other or arguing. Now, it hasn't always been like this. We've definitely had some competitions where it got a little bit heated, but this I think was the biggest reason why they did so well. Last video for you. Oh, no, you can see what I see now, right? If I put this here, can you see that? No. Yeah, there we go. Again, as you watch this, you have to understand what's happening in the background. Like, the equivalent business scenario is the world is on fire. People are grabbing papers and throwing them on the floor and scrambling at laptops to try and get hackers out and trying to figure out how they got into the system. And in this instance, Laura noticed that the team were kind of really starting to stress out and starting to kind of take things a little bit, maybe too seriously. Just called a 2-3 minute break and got them up and on their feet doing this. And it took maybe 2 or 3 minutes back, but they went back with the productivity and kind of increased motivation and morale to actually go through and start performing again and doing well. Final thing, diversity. So there's been several studies that have shown that in cybersecurity, mixed gender teams are more effective than all male teams. And we've had a chance to look at this very closely, both in a research context and both in a competitive context. This is the first time a team at the Cyber Defense Competition since 2004 in regionals or in nationals has ever been 50% female. It has never happened before. What we've seen is, goes along with a lot of studies, is the natural way of thinking, of problem solving, is just a little bit different with women. It's not necessarily better. It's definitely not worse. It's just different. And when you're trying to figure out how someone is in your network messing with your stuff, having different thought processes and different problem-solving processes is actually extremely valuable. I believe it definitely contributed to the team's morale and ability to kind of just relax and kind of unwind a little bit, but it also significantly benefited the technical expertise. In one instance, or in several instances, our 2 network leads, network and firewall leads, was Chandler and Sarah, and they developed a really effective synergy to be able to kind of cross-check each other, understand what each other were doing, take turns on the keyboard where necessary, using their own expertise in different areas, but always being able to kind of cross-check and spot and give each other advice and tips, and being able to receive that advice as well. And with what we've got going on in cybersecurity right now, and all the, not just the conferences, but the reason these conferences are happening, because this is such a big in-demand and this talked about issue, we need any benefit we can get. Bottom line, know how to have fun, know how to enjoy the experience, because, again, I believe this applies to real-world business scenarios and real-world work problems, not just a competition. Know how to enjoy it. Okay? Most of us are in cybersecurity because it's something we're passionate about. It's something we enjoy. And it's sometimes hard to remember that and keep track of that, especially with everything exploding around us. Don't take yourself too seriously. Okay? If your company gets hacked and it comes down that someone's head needs to fall and yours is the head that falls, guess what? We're actually in an industry that, as long as you haven't publicly and royally screwed up or defamed the company or done something that's really going to get you a bad rep, if it's just a case of someone needs to go because this was screwed up, cybersecurity is a big enough area and in demand enough that you're not going to have a problem finding work. So we don't need to take ourselves too seriously. We don't need to be overly pessimistic and serious about our job. We can afford to enjoy our jobs, do our best, and roll with what comes. And it typically works out pretty well. And finally, if you can walk into breakfast on day 2, when every team has been there already for half an hour and is crammed around the table and they're sweating and they're stressing about what's about to happen that day because they know the red team are going active and going to start attacking them. And this was the picture when BYU's team kind of opened the doors. I think they were the second to last team to arrive, and they were literally chained onto each other doing the Macarena as they came in the room. That discussion from the judges and sponsors didn't stop all day. They constantly wanted to know how and why they were doing that. The future, well, we've graduated several students. Most, in fact, all of them have gone on to security positions. Various companies ranging from Microsoft out in Seattle to Adobe. I'm trying to look at the back of the shirts and seeing who else went there. In fact, most of them went to those 2 companies this year. There are 2 lab sponsors, and so they tend to get first pickings. We're already training for 2017. We will be sending a mixed gender team again. We've got about 12 to 14 students in the running right now. Several of them are here at this conference this week. Please reach out, talk to them. Please don't offer them full-time jobs until they've graduated, because then I can't use them and win these. And obviously you want prize winners. We're always in need of sponsorship, and what is trash to you is often gold to us. Recycled equipment or surplus equipment. In fact, a lot of companies pay to have their surplus equipment taken away if it's still usable. And given that we're upgrading from stuff we received in 2004 and 2005, then it definitely is probably usable to us. Shoot us an email, let us know. We'd love to work with you. Before I go into questions, I'd actually like to invite the team members that are here to come up on stand, because I think at this point it's going to be much more interesting for you to hear from them than it is from me anymore. Sarah, I'm trying to see who's in the front row. Sarah, Cara, Andres is here. I think Chandra I saw walking at the back. Come on up, and if you guys have any questions at all, let's give them an applause while they come up, because they did fantastically. Did I miss anyone else in the room? I don't want to leave anyone out who's here. So if you are on the team, please come up. There's a light that's really hard to see. Okay, so if there's any questions at all to me or to the team members, please go ahead. Yeah, go for it. Hang on.
So one big thing that we started doing this year, that it's the first year that we've done this, is that we have a CCDC class. And that's been really helpful, because now we have a schedule of what we're practicing and how we're learning those things. Before, we would do a few mini CCDCs, mock CCDCs that we made up in the lab that we would try and kind of practice our skills. But a lot of it is individual effort. You have to kind of be training for specific scenarios on your own, and building VMs, hardening VMs, writing scripts, understanding how to do password policies on hosts and things like that. Like, it's a lot of really individual effort.
All right. I think the best way to practice for these competitions is to do these competitions. As you get more and more experience doing them, you go to more and more of them, you just naturally become better, as long as you're you're focusing and trying to do well each time. You kind of learn how they work every time. That's been my experience. And then at a specific institution, for example, at BYU, we've been able to hand down that institutional knowledge to new team members as they come in. And as older team members phase out, we've been able to kind of mine them for any information that they've got to make the team better. Yeah. Any other questions? How do you get people to participate? Pay them money.
I'll do this one first. Honestly, my biggest problem is having to say no to so many students. We especially since this performance, but even before then, for the past few years, I felt constantly bad from having to say no to so many students who wanted to be part of this. They love it. We have in our program probably 80% of our students are declaring cybersecurity as an emphasis area, and 50% of that 80% want to be on the team.
Another thing is let them do it even if they don't feel prepared. I remember I wasn't even a security emphasis. I had just joined the IT program, and Dr. Rowe had just been researching this kind of women in cybersecurity and how gender balance helps teams. And I had mentioned to one of the other students that security sounded cool. The next thing I know, I got an email from Dr. Rowe saying, "Hey, we're going to this CCDC competition in a week. Would you like to join?" And I said, "I don't know anything, so you probably don't want me on your team." He said, "That's fine. We're going to have a couple of people on your team that know things that can help you out." And so our team didn't win that year by any means, but I learned a lot. And it was helpful that I was able to go and be like, it's okay that I know nothing, because that's how I'm going to learn. So if you let them know, it's okay if you don't win, and it's okay if you don't know anything, because that's how you're going to learn. I think there'll be a lot more, they'll just feel more invited into the scenario than if they feel like they have to know everything right away.
Just going along with that, like one of the reasons why I like going to these types of competitions is just because I get to learn a lot. I get to learn new things, just like not things that I probably couldn't learn just by myself. And I get a feel of what the business world would be like. And so just encouraging students to go and like maybe pairing them up with someone else that knows a lot more about the field they want to get into is encouraging enough.
Yeah, make it fun and they'll participate.
Buy them pizza.
Honestly, that's our biggest reimbursement is pizza for the red team. Any other questions? It's really hard to see hands. If you've got your hand up, feel free just to call it out. Yeah. Do you have a question? I thought I saw your hand up. Yeah. How are we able to attract females? I probably shouldn't say this on a video, but I went to a Women in Cybersecurity conference 3 years ago. One of my students got up and we were co-presenting, and as I handed off to her and went back to my seat, she said, was it British accent in cybersecurity? It's like learning cybersecurity from Classy, Downtown Abbey, which was a terrible, terrible thing. And I'm there in a room full of 600 women in cybersecurity who think that was a terrible thing to say, and it probably was. It's nothing to do with that. Honestly, women recruit women. It was very difficult initially to convince a couple to join the lab. They were interested in cybersecurity, but struggled a lot with, I guess, competing with the guys, feeling they were competing with the guys. Guys, from what I've seen in the classroom, tend to, if they don't know it, they'll BS it and just kind of pretend that they do. And several students have had experiences where they've gone and kind of said, okay, so how do we do this lab, or how do we do this homework? And they've been, well, I don't know, but you look like you do. And so the first obstacle, I think, is self-confidence and being able to get them involved and talking. They're definitely as capable. But as soon as we got 2 in the lab, or 2 or 3 in the lab, the women were recruiting women. They were going out and talking to their friends and saying, hey, this is really cool, you can do this stuff. And ever since then, I've been trying to find men to be in the lab. Or actually, more than anything, I've been trying to find funds to pay men to work in the lab, because the college is great at giving me some funds for the women. But right now, I'm really struggling to fund some of the men.
As a woman, I'll answer this question. Well, I find that, well, I personally already had a drive to go into cybersecurity and to go into IT field. So for the other girls that didn't have much as a drive as myself, I just encouraged them that they can do it and that I would help them with whatever needed help, and that is actually not as terrifying as they picture it is.
Yeah, like I said before, allow them to feel okay with not thinking that they know anything. Like, allow them to be able to be vulnerable and to be able to ask questions. That's the biggest thing that I see girls struggle with in our field, is they feel inferior to everyone around them because they're like, it seems like everyone knows a lot more than I do. So if you just allow them to feel like it's okay and that they'll get better as long as they continue, a lot of times that's enough.
They did way better. I should have let them answer from the start. Any other questions? There's technically about 4 minutes left, but I'm happy to finish early and let you go get a drink. I'm parched. Questions? Okay, thank you.